Hi, I'm Jennifer Riddle, Director of Digital Media for CDR Fundraising Group. I will walk you through industry changes to cookies that are impacting online advertising. We'll also hear from Caitlin Watkins about changes to Facebook and Doug Kazmarek about our SimioCloud solution. So to get started, what is a cookie? A cookie is data stored in a small text file on your browser, and then it is solved the problem on how to remember information about a user. First-party cookies are set by the site that the user is visiting. It's read only by the site that created, and functions of it are storing information such as products added to a basket, username and passwords, or your preferred language. Third-party cookies are set by a domain other than the one that you're visiting, read by any website that loads the third-party server's code, and these functions are mainly used for cross-site behavioral and analytics for advertising and web optimization. Changes in consumer privacy regulation and browser and device protocol are impacting the way we have the ability to identify users online. First, we'll look at the privacy regulations that are changing how consumer data is collected. In 2018, the European Union passed the GDPR requiring the consent of residents to collect and share their personal information. In 2018, California passed the Consumer Privacy Act, prohibiting the selling of personal information. In 2020, they passed the California Privacy Act, or CPRA, adding a number of amendments and modifications to CCPA. Some of those were the expansion of California resident privacy rights, new protections for sensitive personal information, establishment of a California privacy regulator, and expansion of the CCPA's private cause of action. Virginia is the latest state to adopt privacy legislation. The Consumer Data Protection Act, or CDPA, was signed early in March of this year. The bill adopts some of the same terms as seen in the CPRA, most notably the collection of sensitive personal data and privacy notice requirements. The CPRA goes into effect the first day of 2023 and will only apply to select businesses at that time. Those that are either control or process data for at least 100,000 state residents, or that make 50% of their gross revenue from the sale of personal data, and control and process personal data of at least 25,000 consumers. One interesting difference from CPRA is that CDPA does not have a revenue threshold in California. A business generating more than $25 million in annual revenue is subject to the CPRA, regardless of its number of consumers or records. Other states currently working on consumer privacy laws that resemble Virginia and California's terms include Florida, Minnesota, New York, Oklahoma, and Washington. Nevada and Vermont have additionally adopted data privacy bills that put restrictions on data brokers. Now we'll look at changes in browser and device protocols. Third-party cookies are going away, but this isn't new. The industry has evolved in response to consumer feedback and increased consumer privacy regulations. In 2018, Apple announced the blocking of third-party cookies used for cross-site tracking on their Safari browser. In 2019, Mozilla Firefox followed suit. These browsers make up 30% of all browser use on the internet. Also in 2019, Apple limited first-party cookie life to 24 hours for cross-site tracking. Google's announcement that they would phase out cookies on the Chrome browser in 2022 would bring third-party cookie blocking to 100%. This year, Apple deprecated the Identifier for Advertisers, or IDFA, with their iOS 14 software update, and soon Google will do the same with their Google Advertising ID, or GAID, for Android devices. In response to elimination of third-party cookies, over 80 user identity solutions are emerging. Let's look at identity solutions on the spectrum from authenticated to cohort-based. With Unified ID 2.0, users are matched based on email or phone number to hash login data. This is a high-quality solution that has limitations of scale due to limited login data. On the other end of the spectrum is Google's Solve, the Federated Learning of Cohorts, or FLoC, which is a privacy-focused solution to deliver relevant ads by clustering large groups of people with similar interests. Accounts are anonymized, grouped into interest, and importantly, user information is processed on device rather than broadcast across the web. The type of information that will be collected includes URLs of sites the user visited, content of those pages, among other factors. Users are assigned to new cohorts on a weekly basis based on their previous week's browsing data. Google has announced that it expects to start testing FLoC-based cohorts with advertisers beginning in Q2 of this year. Effectiveness varies on the strength of the clustering algorithm and the strength of the targeted interest. Google states it's delivering 95% of the conversions per dollar spent when compared to cookie-based advertising. While Google announced that it would not build or use alternate identifiers to track users for advertising purposes, it will not restrict users from using their preferred identity solution to identify individuals for audience targeting and measurement. When running on Google's ad products and running on non-Google owned inventory, they will only allow the use of privacy-preserving methodologies such as data anonymization and aggregation. For Google owned and operated sites, will be able to use individual level targeting and reporting as they have attained consumer data consent. So Flock versus third-party cookies. Third-party cookies are placed code on the user's browser to track internet activity for ad targeting at the individual level. Google's Flock takes a user's web browsing history provided by Google Chrome to associate the user with a cohort of users for ad targeting on an aggregate level. How Google Flock will impact advertising. Currently with cookies, we can identify the following about a consumer. Using a veteran service organization as an example, we know that Janice, female, age 56, frequently visits the VSO website, reads articles on military.com, shops for cycling helmets and shoes online, and purchases children's apparel online. The Flock internet space shows the user in the cohort cluster XYZ123, with charity donors and volunteers, military interests, cycling enthusiasts, and children's apparel purchasers. Google will try to avoid sensitive categories such as race and sexuality. If a Flock starts to mirror one of these categories, the system is designed to spot this and reconfigure it, and users can also opt out. With Apple changes, it announced it would roll out changes to its IDFA tracking system and would make all app data tracking opt-in, explicit prompts that explain to users what data each app is recording. This change was implemented with the recent iOS 14 software update. It's anticipated about 20% will opt in, leaving 80% of users not trackable. Apple will provide privacy-centric attribution through its SK ad network or SCAN and app tracking transparency ATT framework to protect those users who opt out of IDFA sharing. Now, Caitlin will walk you through how iOS 14 updates are impacting the Facebook advertising app.
So last month, Apple rolled out its new app tracking transparency framework, as Jennifer mentioned, which is requiring apps to prompt users for permission to track their behavior online for advertising purposes. So Facebook's solution to this is to limit tracking based on a prioritized list of conversions per user per session. So first things first, all mobile users will get a prompt like the one at the right at some point in the next couple of weeks if they haven't already. If you choose allow, Facebook will continue to track online behavior as in the past. If you choose ask app not to track, Facebook will only track you for the top prioritized action that you take in a session. We'll dive into this in the next few slides. Facebook is also doing away with the view through attribution. Before, if you saw an ad on your newsfeed and later converted within 24 hours, Facebook counted that as a successful conversion. Moving forward, you must physically click the ad in order to be tracked through conversion completion. What does all this mean? Well, first it means that there are a couple of key things that we as advertisers must do in order to continue to run ads. First, an organization must verify its domain so that only advertisers formally associated with that brand can run ads to their site. Next, each domain is allowed to optimize towards 8 conversion events. This allocation is at the domain level, so if a brand has multiple agencies running ads on its behalf, they must all come to a consensus on which 8 to track. Then the organization must rank them from highest to lowest priority. For a user who opts out of tracking, only the highest ranked conversion taken will be tracked per session. As nonprofits, we recommend ranking a donation conversion as a top priority, as is shown here, unless your organization has a stronger focus on another goal, such as generating new members. While these changes seem daunting, prioritizing a donor conversion will result in the least loss of data where it matters, which is revenue. So for example, say I opt out of tracking and I click on an ad for the organization whose conversion list is shown here. If I sign up for the newsletter, which would be a lead, and then I continue on to make a donation, I would only be counted as having made a donation as that event is prioritized above the lead. So what impact will this have on our advertising? Right off the bat, it has led to a decrease to the size of narrowly targeted custom audiences that are built off website retargeting. Sticking with the example from the last slide, if you're trying to retarget leads, yet a user made a donation in the same session, they'll be missing from that lead targeted pool because they're only been counted as having made a donation, not a lead. This means that there'll be more reliance on using specific CRM files for retargeting audiences, and we'll also have to rely on higher funnel prospecting audiences, people who aren't as familiar with the organization, who will end up costing more to acquire. Next, we're expecting to see lower in-platform results. Before the rollout, Facebook said that it expected 80% of users to opt out, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, but current data is showing that that number is actually closer to 94%. Because of that, lower prioritized conversion events will start seeing less results. And additionally, as I mentioned on the first slide, the results in platform will no longer include those view-through donations and revenue, or results in general, so that in itself will lead to lower results. And lastly, and this one is a bit harder to evaluate, we'll expect to see an increase in audience overlap. Without the ability to exclude complete groups of people in one audience from another, the amount of overlap will likely go up. Advertisers will have to ensure they're being diligent about checking for high amounts of overlap between audiences to avoid under-delivery, though it's something that Facebook is already implementing ways to do that for us. So the good news is it's not all doom and gloom when it comes to this update. There are a couple of key things that we can do to help minimize the negative impact that this has on Facebook advertising efforts. So first, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, nonprofits should prioritize the donation conversion event as the top one. Next, organizations will need to rely heavily on CRM files and lists of donor data. These lists will still match back to Facebook in the same way that they were before. So having these files that can not only be used to target people directly, but can be used to create lookalikes off of, will be even more valuable than they were before. Speaking of lookalikes, utilizing the high value feature for creating lookalikes can be another way to target those more likely to give higher amounts by uploading lists that have donor value in them. Continuing with prospecting, it'll become increasingly important to use very specific interests and layering different levels of interest on top of one another to create the most targeted while still comprehensive audience. If organizations are struggling with fitting conversion events into that 8-event limit, using on-platform tools like the in-platform lead generation form is a great way to save space on off-platform conversions. And lastly, consider who your audience is and how you can expand it. Gen Z and younger millennials have been shown to be more willing to trade privacy for convenience and therefore could be more likely to allow tracking to continue. So reaching this group may become more valuable than they were in the past.
So looking forward, we're living in the cookie-free-ish future. Where do we start? So now that you know it's happening, how do you respond? It's important to understand there isn't a single solution that solves every challenge for a marketer comes to filling the gap left by third-party cookie data. Marketers must assess their goals, strategies, and KPIs to determine the set of solutions that best meet their needs. Assess your reliance on third-party cookies with your current campaigns. Evaluate your first-party data and how you can maximize use for marketing efforts, and be clear on your business goals and identify KPIs you can track without the use of third-party cookies. Utilizing your first-party data for targeting and measurement will be crucial. You'll have a ton of CRM data at your fingertips. Maximizing targeting strategies with your current CRM database is how you will achieve scale and effectiveness in a post-cookie environment. As donor information often in a privacy-compliant manner, this data can be used in the following ways: first-party audience segmentation and targeting strategies. You leverage the first-party data you have, such as website visitors, app users, donor list, to get back in touch with your most high-value consumers. Use your first-party data to acquire new donors through lookalike modeling and help you reach people with similar interests and behaviors as the people who have donated in the past. Match offline data to online identities to target individuals based on their online shopping history and internet behaviors and app downloads and more. And exclude current and recent donors as well as sustainers to eliminate waste. Utilize contextual targeting with first-party data to extrapolate relevant ad context similar to our example about flocks, choosing military interests for a VSO. Now Doug will walk you through how to leverage our SimioCloud product in the cookieless environment.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, I'm Doug Kesmer, Chief Data Officer at More. So kind of reiterate a little bit on the last piece that Jennifer just talked about and kind of start with the first-party data component. So, you have a donor file, you have rich donor history, and thinking about kind of those donors and what other information can you layer on top of them and what is the value of that information to help make decisions and fundraising decisions. So the slide here kind of just shows, upper right-hand side around how people spend money first and foremost, understanding your donors and where they've given through what channels and what amounts. Obviously, that's paramount. But there is other information that you can layer in on top of these donors to help make targeting decisions. Certainly, there's demographic information and geodemographics, everything from their presence of children in the home, marital status, that type of information, how much they look like their neighbors, what are the socioeconomics of the neighborhoods that they live in. And then, the wealth measures, the income, creditworthiness types of things in the upper left certainly are very important at making decisions for who could be a potential mid-level or major donor. And then other interesting types of things like survey response data. What are people saying about themselves, whether you've sponsored your own surveys or layering in surveys from others on top of those individuals. And then other information in the upper right around data around what your donors are doing and how they spend money in other forms. What types of merchandise do they purchase? What kind of services do they use? What types of publications, both online and offline, do they subscribe to? So with all of this richness of data at the first party level, information that you can literally buy or use data companies to plug into your donor base, you can start to do super effective targeting. So on the next slide, I'm kind of comparing and contrasting with addressability versus without. So at the individual level, data companies like Simio and others can help you make very precise predictions on individuals that can be leveraged into very effective segmentation and targeting schemes that ultimately can be executed at that individual level, both in direct mail and in online digital channels through Facebook, those types of things. And it's been very effective to date, but it certainly is going to get more challenging without addressability. But still, I think it's going to be extremely important for organizations and companies to have a really good sense of their individuals, and they can roll them up. If we go back one second, just to kind of compare to the without addressability, you can roll up your consumer file using all of that first party data into segments or cohorts that, I guess in the terminology of Google, the flock, that segment level, you can understand what types of segments that you should be targeting by doing aggregations on your own first party data. And you can then start to understand how your particular file aligns, with example, with different media properties. And then you can optimize your spend relative to those properties. I would make a note, and it was interesting kind of as Jennifer and Caitlin went through it. One of the things that is going to be eliminated kind of from that aggregate view is race. And that's an interesting component in the nonprofit space, because a lot of organizations are very focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only within their organizations, but within their donor base, and making efforts to try and get their donor base to more closely align with what their particular mission is all about. And so in some instances, having an inability to target different minorities is going to be very challenging, especially kind of in this new digital environment. So we're going to have to see how all of that plays out. So on to the next slide. Just taking a step into that first party data a little bit, a complete data set for acquisition. What does it really have? It starts with your donor file. It starts with the richness of transactions and where you acquired people through what sources. It layers in wealth and income data. It layers in self-reported data. It layers in demographics and lifestyle. But then in the data company sense, it layers in second party transactional data. So through data companies, you can get a very rich understanding of your donors and what they do with other nonprofit organizations or commercial entities. Where else are they donating money? Where else are they transacting? What types of products are they buying? And that rich data set can then be used to develop acquisition audiences built in this offline world, but then deployed into any channel. So yes, the historical way that most of these cooperative companies and data companies have done business has been indirect mail, but certainly the delivery of these audiences into digital channels has been happening for a long time. So I just want to take a step back and be very specific about it. You can go in and build lookalike audiences within a platform, potentially uploading data, and then the particular channel, Facebook, for example, could be building lookalike models on the audience you upload using their data. You can also go to a data company, build a lookalike audience there with all of the richness of the data I just described, and upload those audiences as well. Again, it is going to get more challenging as inventory goes away, as cookies go away, but there's still a ton of value to doing that. And it's going to be something that should be tested, on a go-forward basis with those kind of on-platform lookalike type models. And I would also say you can go beyond lookalike models, and most data companies do this as a standard. You can actually develop models around, was the particular individual promoted? Did they respond or not? And so it's not just a lookalike to your highest value donors, it's getting at actual actions. Did they respond to a particular campaign? So moving into the next slide, once you get that donor and you have them on your file, I think that understanding the real specificity of predictions that can be made with first-party data and then leveraging it across all channels is very important. Thinking about kind of the value pyramid for nonprofits of having annual givers kind of at the bottom, folks that are high volume but low dollars. How do you figure out who to move up the value chain? Who can likely become a monthly sustainer or a mid-level giver, or even a major donor or donor advised fund giver, and then eventually a planned giver? So developing very specific predictive models, again, at the individual level to move people up the value chain, and then taking action on them across all channels is something that folks should be doing. So having a digital strategy that kind of just lumps all these together and doesn't think about how you can segment your donor file and should be talking to them differently in digital channels as well as direct mail is probably not going to be as good as if you do this type of work, segment effectively, understand intent through predictive models, and again, a robust data environment helps you do that and definitely outpaces any third-party solutions without the richness of that data present. And then on the next slide, I threw this one in there because in my value pyramid on the previous slide, I didn't list non-donors, and I have seen examples throughout the years of organizations that have really rich data that they're not leveraging one way or the other. So they may own a list of volunteers or survey responders or event attendees, and they're not monetizing that list effectively by using the first-party data and predictive analytics on top of those names and addresses of folks or email addresses to segment them appropriately, to find out who's actively participating or donating with other organizations, and then moving them forward and getting them into your value pyramid and converting them to donors or to sustainers. So it's important to always look under every rock within the organization and find names and addresses, and then overlay data, build models, and then deploy them across all channels and think about them as a valuable resource. And then finally, the last slide here is the dreaded measurement one. This is the one that's always the most difficult. It was said earlier that the focus needs to be on that back-end conversion rate, understanding who's actually converting, or whether you look at cost to acquire, those types of metrics, but look at the hard metrics when you're doing measurement. Clearly, first-party data and addressable media gets to very clean measurement, but in an environment where organizations are looking to push out messaging across all channels, you need to just think carefully around how you can measure effectively one channel versus another. And if you have a lot of non-addressable media going out there, there are ways to set up baselines and control groups and to measure that. It gets a lot more tricky. In the commercial world, a lot of Fortune 500 companies do this all day long with more advanced analytical techniques like media mix optimization. They can understand as they dial up the spend within one channel, how it affects the overall bottom line and conversion, as well as how it impacts other channels. So it's a pretty complex world, and it's going to be clearly even more complex as more of the inventory and more the specificity of addressable media digitally kind of goes away. And it's just going to be real interesting as to whether or not the adoption of some of those, the slide that we went through real quick of the 80 different universal IDs, what's going to win out? It's hard to know, right? And just today I saw an article about some of the major publishers even being skeptical of whether or not they should be participating in any of those universal IDs. So obviously it's a fast changing landscape. And my advice is to double down on your first party data, because that can root you in everything you do and really should be the basis for everything that you do. So with that, I think we have plenty of time for questions and comments, and would love to take those with the team.
Thank you. And we saved a good amount of time here because we know that this is a topic that a lot of folks have a lot of questions on. You can use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or throw them into the chat box. But while folks are writing in, I'll ask a question of my own. Looking at, since Google and Facebook are public companies, they've likely done some projections about how much this is going to change the nature of their ad business, whether it's decreased click-throughs because of decreased personalization or decreased scope outside of their networks. Do we know what they're telling folks the quote unquote loss is going to be?
I haven't seen any predictions about loss. I know the one stat I threw out from Google is they feel like they have modeled the flocks and such that they will still capture 95% of the same conversions that they are capturing now. I'm sure that's highly in response to their search product more than anything else. But right now, Google's has high confidence level. Also, a number of technology partners and publishers are simultaneously testing their identity solutions against cookies and refining their models. So I know that that is going to be their goal, is to make sure that that performance isn't lost.
Okay. I know Facebook was out there running ads trying to get people to opt in to personalized solutions. Ironically, untargeted on Spotify. So when you have an ad in favor of personalized ads that is not personalized, you get arrested by the irony police pretty quick. So as we're waiting for questions to come in, as clients are coming to you asking about their digital spend, how are you suggesting that they reallocate it, if at all? Or is it the same spend, same channels, different techniques?
I would say that we always have to make sure we take care of the lowest funnel, make sure we capture that with their search, and then next level with social. The higher funnel levels, that's where we're highly addressable, and that's where we use that first party data, its highest ability in multiple segments, and really leverage that piece. And then also keep our pulse on, as those identity solutions evolve and are made available to us, how can we best leverage those?
And I know the M&R benchmarking came out and said that large organizations have positive return on ad spend for display, social, and search. Search isn't as scalable, but display and social, those are ones that you could probably increase your spend and still have a decent payback period. I'm assuming you're finding that as well.
So as we those upper funnels, the people usually convert on search or on direct website paths. So, as you raise that awareness and show people ads, they tend to, act at some point on some other touch point, whether it be when they get an email or a direct mail piece. It does help to have multiple touch points and have that attribution in different ways.
That does bring up a good question. How does this change impact co-targeting and making sure that someone who gets the mail package also gets similar ads online, for example?
So I think it's always rely on that first party data, making sure we align those, also holding out a control group in order to kind of measure that response. But I think it's going to depend on your partner's identity solutions and kind of what those look like. There's so many out there, and we're not going to know which one really wins just yet, but definitely LiveRamp has been in play for a long time, and an identity solution in the Unified 2.0 has been around for a long time with the Trade Desk. So there are options that are not cookie based that are out there.
That's great. Anything else for the good of the group?
I know that Facebook feels very impacted by the iOS change, and I am convinced that they are going to make every effort to make that have as little impact as possible. Being in this industry for a very long time, I am reminiscent of where we were only back to contextual targeting. That was the only way we could target anyone, and everything was non-addressable. So I'm sure we've learned things from that past that can be applied for the future, but definitely first party data is the key that unlocks most of the doors for the addressable future.
And this will be a conflict for years to come. You look at Apple and they don't have ad revenue, and they own the relationship with a decent amount of consumers. So that tension will always be there.
Well, I believe that with the walled gardens used to exist, and now they're kind of putting the walls back up. I believe that Apple will start leveraging their access and sell more ads than they ever have in the past, with some of their walls going up with data.
Interesting. You heard it here first. Do you mind giving out your email addresses in case others have questions?
No problem. I'm at jriddle, RIDDLE, at cdrfg.com.
And I'm C Watkins, CWATKINS at cdrfg.com.